You ever stop and think about how powerful a single idea can be? I mean, not a weapon, not an army, just an idea. An idea that, once it takes root, can literally reshape the entire world. Well, today, we're going to dive into one of the most powerful sets of ideas in all of history, the Enlightenment.
All right, so let's just start with the big one, the question that really kicks this whole thing off. What gives one person, a king, a queen, an emperor, the right to rule over millions of other people? For centuries, nobody really questioned that. It just was. But then, the Enlightenment came along and dared to ask, hey, wait a second, is there a better way to do this?
So before this whole revolution of ideas, society was basically propped up on three massive pillars. First, you had religious authority. It dictated pretty much everything about your life, what you believed, how you acted. Second, you had absolute monarchs, kings and queens who ruled with power they said came straight from God. And third, the state controlled the economy with an iron fist. It was a world where you knew your place and you absolutely did not question it.
But then, a spark. A completely new way of thinking starts to spread, and it's about to set that entire old world order on fire. So let's take a closer look at this revolutionary idea.
It's really hard to overstate just how radical this was at the time. For centuries, the main view is that people were, inherently flawed and just needed to be controlled. The Enlightenment comes along and completely flips that script. It asks this wild question, what if people are actually naturally good? And what if we could use our greatest tool, our own reason, to make progress and improve not just our own lives, but all of society?
And this concept, tabula rasa, was basically the engine driving that idea of progress. It's this idea that you're born a blank slate. It means nobody is born inherently better than anyone else. Just think about what that implies. A king wasn't born divine. He was just a person whose blank slate was written on differently. Suddenly, the focus shifts massively to education and experience. Those become the things that truly shape who you are, not your bloodline.
So what these thinkers did was they essentially built a toolkit for changing the world. Reason? That was the main tool in the box. Education was how you kept it sharp. Social reforms were the actual projects you could build with it. And the glue holding it all together was this incredible idea of natural rights, freedoms that you are born with that no king or government has the right to take away from you, ever.
And this, right here, was a real game-changing leap. People were looking up at the sky, seeing scientists like Newton discovering these incredible natural laws that govern the planets. And they started to think, well, hang on. If there are natural laws for the universe, why can't there be natural laws that guide our societies? All of a sudden, things like politics and economics weren't just these mysterious things decided by a king or by God. No, they were systems that could be studied, understood, and maybe, just maybe, even fixed.
Okay, so you can't just introduce these kinds of radical new ideas without them crashing head-on into the old pillars of power. And the very first collision course was with religious authority. The challenge wasn't really about getting rid of faith, it was about shifting humanity's focus away from the heavens and down to life right here on Earth.
So the first big pushback came from humanism. This was the idea that our well-being, right here, in this world, is a really important goal. It's not all just about getting salvation in the next life. And at the same time, you have these new economic ideas that are pulling power away from the traditional institutions. The focus was fundamentally shifting from the divine to the human and from the church to the state and, crucially, to the individual.
All right, so with that first pillar starting to shake, these new ideas began to hammer away at the second one, government itself. And the core change here was this total shift in identity. You are no longer just a passive subject of a king. The new idea was that you are an active citizen of a nation.
And this is really the heart of that redefinition. The old way of thinking was called divine right. It basically said a ruler's power comes straight from God, and you have absolutely no say in the matter. The radical new idea was the social contract. This argued that a government's power, its right to exist, comes only from the consent of the people it governs. Power suddenly flowed from the bottom up, not the top down. A huge change.
And this, as you could imagine, led to a massive shift in what people even thought a government should be. The old model was absolute rule, a monarch with basically unlimited power. The new ideal was something called a limited government, one that's held in check by laws, by a constitution. A government designed specifically to protect the rights of its citizens.
So you see, these thinkers weren't just interested in tearing things down. They were actually offering blueprints for how to build something new and better. The social contract, that was the foundation. A limited government, Those were the protective walls. And then you had ideas like the separation of powers. That was the internal architecture, designed to make sure no single part of the government could ever get too powerful.
And that brings us to the third and final pillar of that old world, the economy. The thinking was pretty simple, really. If reason can help us redesign government, why can't it redesign how we buy, sell, and trade? It was time, they thought, to unchain the economy from total state control.
See, the old system was called mercantilism, and it was all about the government controlling everything to hoard as much wealth as possible for the nation. The radical new idea, laissez-faire, was the complete opposite. It argued that the economy actually works best when it's just left alone, when individuals are free to go out and act in their own best interest.
And look, there's that idea of natural law popping up again. Laissez-faire literally just means let it be or leave it alone. The belief was that an economy driven by the self-interest of millions of different people all making their own choices would sort of naturally regulate itself, like an invisible hand guiding it, and end up creating more prosperity for everyone, all without the heavy hand of the government telling people what to do.
All right, so let's pull all these threads together. These challenges to religion, to government, to the economy, these were not just some dusty old academic debates. They created a powerful echo, a resonance that is absolutely still shaping the world we live in today.
And you can really see the whole anatomy of this revolution laid out right here. It's a three-step process. Step 1, a powerful new idea is born, in this case, reason and natural rights. Step 2, that idea directly challenges the old order, the church, the crown, the controlled economy. And finally, Step 3, from that massive clash, a brand new society is forged, one built on the promise of freedom and self-government.
And it's so important to remember this was not just some European story. This was an intellectual shockwave that crossed oceans. It inspired revolutions and independence movements all over the globe. The language of rights, of consent, of liberty, it became a universal call to action for people everywhere.
Which brings us to one final thought. The real, enduring legacy of the Enlightenment isn't just a bunch of historical facts you have to memorize for a test. It's a method. It's a challenge, really, a call to use our own reason to look at the world around us. So the question it leaves for us, for you and me, is this. What authorities, what assumptions, what old pillars in our own world should we be questioning today?